Okay, so we've had to lose the hamster wheel, the burning piano, the ice skater and the milkmaids. But at least the Bundesliga is back. Yes, great news for everybody. The Bundesliga is back, but Belgium have decided to call it a day, unfortunately, as we're just coming to air. Will Downing with you with another edition of Lockdown Football alongside my fellow Lockdown Football commentators Dmytro, Dzhulai, Stephane Jauny, Mark Rodden, and we'll be joined later by Dan O'Hagan to talk about the big Bundesliga kickoff. Well, I was supposed to be in the Netherlands all this week. What plans have you had cancelled recently then, gentlemen?
Belgium, Netherlands, the EFL Championship, and the MLS as well. There's a lot of games coming up for this weekend and the previous weekends and the coming weekends, but unfortunately, with the virus, everything has been called off.
21st of May, under 17 European Championship would kick off in Estonia, and I enjoyed working on that tournament last year in Ireland, and of course I hoped to get to Estonia and to see the tournament again, but well, it's postponed now and we'll have to see what happens with that.
Absolutely. All of our accommodation would have been sorted as well. Mark, what have you had cancelled on you then of late?
Apart from work, you mean? I was supposed to be in Madrid on a stag around about March 22nd. Would have taken in Real Madrid Valencia, I think, as well. Obviously that didn't happen. And then there was a wedding in Croatia towards the end of May as well, so hopefully that'll all be done next year instead.
That's all we can hope for. The Belgian Pro League will be coming back later in the year, but they will not be resuming with the current season. It is all over. The Belgian Pro League having their meeting today. Club Brugge are the champions for the third time in 5 seasons and with 3 different coaches in charge. Wasl and Beveren have been relegated, and I suppose to a large extent it was on the cards because of what the Belgian Prime Minister had decreed a couple of weeks ago, that no sport could happen before the 1st of July.
Yeah, really rubber stamping what was said by the government, and it was really just about trying to come up with a solution that served everyone, really. No surprise and no real complaints that Club Brugge are champions, 15 points ahead in the table with 1 game left in the regular season when play was suspended. Champions for the 16th time. Waasland were 2 points away from safety. They had a tough game against second place Ghent to come to save themselves. Just very interesting what's going to happen. It's still a little unclear in terms of promotion. 1 leg of a promotion playoff was played between Leuven and Beerschot. Beerschot, I think, 1-0 up from the first leg of that. And it's a little unclear. They've said that you guys have to come up with a way of playing this return match, whether it's on neutral ground, in Belgium, in Leuven, or maybe in Germany, which has been suggested. And they have to do that by August 3rd, play that game by August 3rd. They have to give an answer by May 31st. And if those 2 clubs can't come up with a solution, then Westerlo will get promoted, unless Verton, who were refused a licence for next season, win a case on appeal, and then they will go up because they've won the most points over the opening and closing stages of the 2-term Belgian second tier. It's ridiculously complicated, and the solution is ridiculously complicated as well. Good news, the Belgian Cup final will be played before August 3rd. That's between Club Brugge and Antwerp, so Club Brugge have a chance of winning the double for the 3rd time in their history.
Oh, you completely lost me, Mark, I have to say.
I know.
You want to repeat?
I can try again.
Nah, it's okay. Once was enough, thanks.
And just news for you as well, one of my colleagues in Belgium, Patrice Tilzen, is a Belgian journalist, and just confirmed that Vincent Beveren will go to court.
Yeah, no surprise.
That makes sense. You wouldn't blame them in this situation, though, would you? Because obviously they'd 1 more game to play, and if they'd won it and the results had gone their way, they'd have stayed up and Ostende would have gone down, but it's not going to be played now. And
for the second-tier football as well, Louvain against Beerschot, just saying that now, that if the game can be played before the 2nd of August, it means the winner of that game will be promoted. If not, it will be Westerlo.
So the full situation, Club Brugge are the champions. They were 15 points clear of Ghent, who were runners-up. Charleroi finished third. They're in the group stage of the Europa League. It is their highest finish since 1969 when they were runners-up. Anderlecht in 8th under Vincent Kompany have their worst finish since 1938. It's extraordinary. All that money and they've ended up looking terrible. So glory be, the Bundesliga is back. So where were we? We're entering week 26. Bayern Munich are 4 points clear of Borussia Dortmund and 5 ahead of Leipzig. Borussia Mönchengladbach and Bayer Leverkusen aren't that far away either. And Dan O'Hagan joins us from his garden. That's what I tried to do last week, Dan, and it didn't quite work out. It looks brilliant.
Oh, it's great. So nice, and early summer's arrived, I think, in Norfolk. So, yeah, really happy.
And I bet delighted that the Bundesliga's back and you've got a big job to work on again.
Yeah, first of all, lucky, because obviously there's lots of guys in our line of work who don't have work at the moment. So fortunate that the Germans have done things the way they have and got football back. We know there's pressure on the whole German game to get this right and for us to get our kind of tone right in commentary as well, which I'm sure we will do. But yeah, I've not worked now for, I think, 70 days tomorrow since my last game, which is longer than the end of one season to the next would be normally. So it's been that long. So yeah, back to with, for me, Frankfurt Gladbach tomorrow.
And obviously, you would have been kept in touch with what's been happening in Germany, and presumably behind the scenes, a lot of the Bundesliga World Feed productions would have been doing the same. We're hearing this, we're hearing that, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of got an idea the games were coming back maybe only, less than 2 weeks ago. We got the kind of go-ahead that it was going to happen, but we've kept our eyes on things, and there's been, yes, it might, no, it won't, this will happen, that'll happen. But finally we heard, I think 10 days ago that this weekend was going to be when it all got underway again. And yeah, match day 26 is going to happen.
Was there an undercurrent or a threat or a thought that it might not happen, despite how well the coronavirus crisis had been tackled in Germany, that they may go the same line as the Netherlands, as Scotland's been threatening, and that the season would be shut?
I think when you saw leagues like the French League, the Dutch League, say that's it, I think you do think, well, maybe this is going to be a knock-on thing where all the major leagues decide to call it a day and wait till next season. But I think with the Bundesliga, the clubs always wanted to get this season finished if they could. And there was very much a collective, almost unanimous, I think, pull towards making sure that happened. And obviously now it is going to happen, or at least they're going to try and restart. And we'll see if we do get the 9 match days played. Hopefully, fingers crossed, there's going to be no flare-ups and no kind of second spikes in the virus in Germany. But you never can tell. The situation's so fluid. But yeah, we're back, and yeah, really looking forward to working on football again.
Absolutely. And, not talking about football not taking place. I mean, there was a situation with Dynamo Dresden a few days ago where some of their players had tested positive. Is there a provision that if players start testing positive in the top flight that it may be stalled again, or will it just work around them or continue without them for a couple of weeks?
I think the plan is to work around any players who do test positive. A positive test, as I understand, will not mean the entire team gets quarantined again. But teams are in kind of sealed camps in hotels before each match day. So every precaution that could have been taken has been taken. It couldn't have been done, I think, any safer than it is going to be done. But obviously, it's a whole new world, and it's never been done before. This whole situation, football across the world closing down for, 2.5 months, that will never happen again, hopefully. So for everyone, for every league going, this is a whole new world, and everything is extraordinary, experimental, and untried. So we'll see where this one goes. But as I say, I think the German game have done all they can to make sure they're in the right place, the right position, and to give this the best possible shot.
I mean, absolutely nobody's faced anything like this before who was an adult when there was a global pandemic last. In terms of the TV production, the world feed, presumably it'll be a little bit different this time. And obviously the stadiums will be, because they'll be pretty much empty.
Yeah, I believe the stadiums are allowing 213 people inside. Obviously, that's security staff, the players, the coaches, the referees, the TV crews. That's all. So media very much not really included. So we'll be commentating remotely, a mix of London and I think Cologne productions. And it's all going to be done safely. I have a co-commentator, Mark Schwarzer, with me for my game on Saturday, and we're going to be sat the right distance apart. It's all very, as I say, everything that's been done to make this safe has been done. So we've got no concerns, no great worries, no great fears about the production. We work with great people, and they have done everything they can to make sure that this will work and work properly. And we'll see how it goes. But you never know until it's been done. So this first match day for all of us is a massive test of the situation, of the technology, and of how it all works. So we'll see. We'll know by the end of Monday if it's all worked.
How nice has it been to start preparing for football again and doing your notes and getting everything set out just so?
I'd forgotten how much I missed the routine of, prepping for a game. I was one who would kind of moan back in August and September of having too many games to prep for. But to have not had one for 70 days, you kind of missed the, getting the pens out and the blank sheet of paper and doing all that prep and going from scratch. But yeah, I think we've all missed it. And as I say, I know that on the Bundesliga, us commentators are very lucky because there's guys who work on the Premier League, on Liga, and on the Belgian League, as you do, Will, who don't have games this weekend. And I only hope that for all of us, this is the first step to getting the whole business back online because, yes, obviously safety and health comes first for everyone, but an industry here that thousands rely on has come to a shuddering halt. So the sooner we get back to a form of football normality, I think the better for all of us.
And the pity was, from a German point of view, it's been a classic season. Like there were 5 teams divided by 8 points at the top. It's really open, and it's not a jaunt to the title for Bayern Munich this season. No,
it's a 4, if not 5-way title race this season. It was close between them and Dortmund last year. This year's even better. Bayern look good, but they had their early season wobbles. They've kind of found their gear again after Christmas, as they often do. Dortmund, great to watch, but very inconsistent sometimes. But with Jadon Sancho in full flow this season has been terrific. I think Marco Reus is close or very close to being back to full fitness as well because of this break. Leipzig, the kind of, almost the wild card who've come on so far in the last couple of years, and they're up there on merit with Timo Werner playing fantastically. And Borussia Mönchengladbach too, the great team of the 70s, but no title since 77. Suddenly they're back in that title race and looking good themselves. And even Leverkusen in 5th place are not out of it completely. So yeah, a 5-way race for the title. It's been super to watch so far. And okay, with no fans there, it's going to be different. We know that. But hopefully we'll get a good final 9 games of the season to get that title race down to the wire again.
Well, for me, the major concern, the most important thing to ask about is Werder Bremen, because they seem to follow a very peculiar and particular path. And I noticed that my competitor, Viktor Skripnik, became the manager of the first team. But he came from the reserves and they were struggling. They stayed up. They did well in the beginning of next season, something like that, and then it just went down for them. So Alexander Nuri came in. It was the same model, even talking about getting into the European competitions. Then Kochfeld came in, and it's the same situation. Good start, and then they're struggling again. So what is happening with them for so many years now?
I would say this season's problem has been injuries early on. I think for the first maybe 2-3 months, they lost almost all of their regular back 4. And this was a team already who'd had 3 or 4 years of having a dreadful defensive record. So they give too many goals away. And yes, they have really good players going forward. Milot Rashica has had a really good season despite where the team are in the table. But I think a team that gives away too many goals year on year will eventually get found out. They have this season. But injuries to players, I think, in the first half of the season did not help them at all, because I think I did the game against Leipzig in September where they were literally the bare bones. This was like 4 or 5 games in. And it's been really hard to kind of catch up with the rest because they've been, as I say, really ravaged by injuries. And it's a club who have been in the top division, I think, unbroken for nearly 40 years since their last relegation. And if they went down, it would be a massive blow, obviously, for them. But also, I think there'd be a big loss to the league too, because Werder Bremen's a famous name, a famous club. And for whatever reason, the last few years have been a kind of constant downward slide.
Yeah, because if you remember back in the 80s when Otto Hagel was the manager, they had a fantastic team. And they had so many famous victories in the European competitions, and they ended up winning Winners' Cup as well early in the 90s. And speaking of injuries, actually, well, one of the players I loved watching whenever I was commentating on Bundesliga is Finn Bartels. I just loved him as a player. In the last 2 seasons, he had 8 games. That's it.
Yeah.
Just 8 games and all from the bench, just to show you how it happens in there.
I think Bartels, he ruptured his Achilles, I think, 2 years ago, which, as we know, is a dreadful injury, really hard to come back from. And he was already kind of pushing 30 or early 30s then, so it's been tough for him. But a really good player, a player who, when he's fully fit, kind of makes that attacking area tick for Werder Bremen. But, the last maybe 2 or 3 seasons, he's not played enough games because of injury. But when he's fit, he's obviously a very important player for them.
It seems, there's a common voice from Germany talking about, we want the football to be back and so on and so on. But for the last few days, I heard anyway from one of the German TV, ARD, that from a poll, basically 56% of the Germans were quite opposed, for the Bundesliga to come back.
Yes, and it's the same here in England, where I think the majority of the public are not in favour of football coming back here either. It was always going to be a kind of gamble. You have to weigh up a whole host of things here. Obviously, people's health, public health is the first thing. But also football clubs need to survive. And the German top 2 divisions, it's not like England where clubs are wealthy because of their owners. In Germany, that's not the case. Clubs need games and TV revenue just to survive. And I think there was certainly a balance to be struck between coming back for health reasons and also coming back to ensure that these clubs still function and they can kind of honour their TV deal commitments and keep on playing. But I'm fully aware that it's not a unanimous public backing for the game coming back in Germany. But I think that's true in most countries too, where football, we've kind of seen that it is only a game, it is only sport. This is not the kind of the all-encompassing thing that maybe those of us who work in the game might sometimes think it is. It'll come back, and obviously not everyone's in favour, but it is coming back. So we'll see how we go from this weekend.
Apparently, the scenario from the German league to, if things doesn't go well, which we hope won't happen, but to stop the league like the French or the Dutch.
I think that is always the kind of the plan B, if you like. If it doesn't work out, if there was a spike in infections among players, they'd have to call it off. I think we know that. But they're going to give it a go. And these protocols in place are done, I think, to ensure the games can go on with the minimum amount of contact between teammates, even between the teams in the stadium. They'll come out of the dressing rooms separately. I think teams are using more than one changing room. Goalkeepers will get changed in one room, attackers in another, coaching staff in another, referees in another. So everything they've done to make this safe has been done. But we'll see if it's enough, because obviously the whole world's watching the Bundesliga this weekend.
And do you think your commentary will be affected by the fake crowd noises that you can see maybe on Sky?
Well, that's the thing. We're not going to use those fake noises on the world feed. We've been told that.
Right, okay.
I know Sky, certainly, they've got this system where I think fans can almost phone in and vote for which chant they want to hear from the kind of virtual fans, which I'm not sure that works. But it is strange, to commentate when there's no one there, because you do have to, I think, almost modulate your own voice. You can't kind of shout and scream the way you would if there was 80,000 people there. You've got to almost match the situation. Obviously, the game still matters. It's a league game, still points are at stake, but it'll feel weird. I'm not doing the game at the weekend, but it's the Revier Derby, Schalke Dortmund, which normally is one of the biggest derbies in the world. Now, for that to be played with no one there, that almost... It's still the derby, but it's not the derby, because the derby is the kind of fans. So it'll be strange for all of us. I think we know that. And the atmosphere is going to be completely different. A league which is renowned for its atmosphere. But, we'll kind of see how things go with it. But, it'll be, I think, hopefully we'll never see this happen again where, fans can't go to games, because the fans in stadiums, they make up so much of what makes this game special.
And just, looking at, again, the league and coming back, and we haven't heard much about the players in Bundesliga. And for the last few days, you could hear some manager will be concerned about the players' health, looking at, for example, injuries not being prepped, properly to come back for a full, league game in Germany, and injuries, players could be prompt to injuries, and that could be an issue to be in the near future for some of the clubs, especially the squads are not, big as you could have in Bayern or Dortmund, for example.
Yeah, I think the clubs have had maybe about 4 weeks of training, not always kind of full contact training either. And, this is like a pre-season, but there've been no pre-season friendlies. They've had 70 days off with no games played in between. So there is going to be a rustiness to players and maybe a lack of match preparedness, which we wouldn't get normally in league play, certainly. So it's different. And clubs will adapt. Players will adapt to. I think in terms of fitness too, there's been a rule announced where teams can use 5 substitutes, which is new, to help them rotate their players more. That'll help. But yeah, that lack of match fitness is going to be very hard to overcome in the first couple of games, certainly.
Different type of views coming out from the press conference, like Wagner, for example, say, look, it's human if my players doesn't want to play. From Schalke, Schalke, and also Flick, you say, look, I'm not afraid for my players. So it seems, people have different views about, for their own clubs and, playing on Saturday. Have you seen, recently, players coming out and expressing the concern about playing on Saturday and not being fully fit? I know all the players will be more or less in the same situation, but, it can be quite worrying, for the players.
It's like all society, some are in favour and some aren't. Players are human. Players are no different to the rest of us. So there have been 1 or 2 voices who've come out and said, is this the right thing to do, to be playing, Bundesliga again? Well, for every player that says no, there's 1 or 2 that will say yes. So it's a case really, I think, of football is coming back. Players won't be forced to play, of course. I'm sure there'll be 1 or 2 voices that, as long as the games go on, will say, is this the right thing? But hopefully it'll be proved to be the right thing, and we can get back to some kind of real normality now in leagues away from the Bundesliga as well.
And I heard Anko Arlich, the manager of Augsburg, won't be on the bench this weekend because he bought apparently some toothpaste.
He did, yeah. The idea is the teams are in this kind of hotel lockdown where they're kept almost in quarantine until match day. And I believe Heiko Herrlich, who's not had a game in charge yet, it's his first game, or would have been this weekend, went out to buy some toothpaste and some skin cream at the local chemist. He was wearing a mask. He maintained his distance, but because that's a breach of Bundesliga protocol for this restart, he can't be involved at the weekend. But the club have said that they won't punish him further because it was a simple mistake. No harm was done. But it just shows that this lockdown the clubs are having imposed on them is total, and any breach of it by even a first-team coach means he can't take part in the game at the weekend.
Apparently, he had a tumor when he in 2000, and he recovered from that, and he's put in quarantine of at least for 2 weeks. Anyway,
an awkward question, if you like. If the season had continued, do you think Bayern would have got it over the line by this stage, or would it still be wide open? It's a horrible question, I know.
It is. I would suggest that it probably would have remained tight. I think Bayern, though they have been much better since Christmas, haven't been the old Bayern. And I think Leipzig and Dortmund certainly were showing signs of, getting very close to them. So we don't know how it would have finished had we played on without the break. But I think we kind of come back with, 9 rounds to go and literally all to play for.
And I guess it's quite tough for the players, playing behind closed doors. We've seen it, in the Champions League with PAG against Borussia Dortmund. It was a very strange atmosphere in the Parc des Princes, and it's going to be very difficult for the players to get used to it. I know they're all professional football players, but getting motivated for the games, not having people around you, it's going to be a massive difference.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's going to be very, very strange. And, I've commentated on games where it's been behind closed doors and it just feels so flat. It's going to be very difficult. And I think, whoever wins this league, it'll be one with, a question mark about would they have won the league had they had fans there. you look at Bayern's game this weekend, they go away to Union Berlin, one of the great atmospheres in the Bundesliga, but there's no one there. That would have been a very tough game for Bayern had Union had their normal home backing. So will maybe the lack of fans be to Bayern's favour in Berlin this weekend? We'll never really know, but it certainly is going to be very different for all of us, for players, for coaches, for commentators, referees, everybody. So it's one we're going to have to get used to, I think, for the next few months.
Is there a police plan in place to keep fans away, just in case? You wouldn't expect it potentially in Germany, maybe, but that some fans may still try and go close to the ground, as happened with Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League a couple of months ago.
I believe there is, yeah. We did have one closed-doors game before the break where Gladbach played Köln in a local derby, and fans did turn up at the stadium that night. But I think we've moved on since then. I think people are much more aware of the seriousness of the situation. I think they wouldn't turn up anyway now. So I think that won't be an issue, but I do believe there are police plans in place that if that did happen, action will be taken.
Very good. Frankfurt against Gladbach for you then this weekend, which is, it is a good, tasty game. Gladbach still up there, floating around fourth spot.
Yes, back to it. And Frankfurt have had a difficult season. Obviously lost their front three in the summer with Rebic, Jovic and Allaire all sold. They scored 41 goals last year, very hard to replace. And the players who have come in haven't really done that. But Gladbach, fourth place, having a great time in that title race, 6 points off the leaders Bayern, and playing great football. Marcus Thuram, Lilian Thuram's sons had a great season. Alassane Player as well. So good game. I'm with Mark Schwarzer on commentary and looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And in a couple of weeks' time, obviously, it's going to be, the Klassiker. It's going to be Bayern against Borussia Dortmund, and it could have a big say into how the title goes.
And again, a game which normally would be one of the great atmospheres, but it'll be different. But when these two meet, it's always obviously a huge occasion. Stakes are going to be high. May well be a title decider again this season. But in recent years, certainly Bayern have had the upper hand. But Dortmund, this season, have the attackers who can beat any team. We know Sancho has had a wonderful season. Marco Reus now back to full fitness. And a young player like Gio Reyna on the fringe too. 17, so exciting. And it could be, as I say, a game which determines where this year's Meisterschale goes.
Yeah, Reyna's really worth talking about because the Bundesliga is the league to go. If you're a young talent, you will be given an opportunity, and he definitely has. It
appears so, yeah. At 17, the son of Claudio Reyna, scored the youngest ever goal scorer in the German Cup when he curled in a beauty against Werder Bremen in February, and looks a wonderful playmaker. Small, stocky, a kind of Messi-esque build to him. Full of tricks, technique at that age, phenomenal, and looks to have a really bright future. Involved in the first team now, really since January. He's kicking on almost game by game, and looks to be the early signs, yes, but looks to be the real deal. And in terms of Erling Haaland, he's come in and he has been sensational pretty much from the start. An amazing scoring record. Hat-trick as a sub on his debut in the Bundesliga. I think it's 6 league games and 9 goals, which has broken all kinds of records in the Bundesliga. It was a kind of safe signing. We knew he was a good player, but I don't think we knew that he was going to be this good so quickly at the higher level in the Bundesliga. But looks a real handful. He's the player they've missed, I think, Dortmund, really in the last 4 or 5 years. They've missed that reliable centre forward. They had Paco Alcácer, but he was never fully fit long enough to get a run in the team to score goals on a consistent basis. But Haaland, his record with Salzburg was remarkable. His record so far in the Bundesliga is almost even better.
Dan, recently there was some talk in Germany, just some interesting comments about the possible revision of the 50+1 rule, which is very famous, which is very important for German football, and that's what so many other fans in so many different countries envy. When they see that, when they compare it to the situation with so many clubs in England. So what is your point of view on that?
I think it is what makes German club football special. The fans have this sense that the clubs are still theirs. We've seen in the Premier League certainly where owners from afar will come in and buy a club, and yes, it'll buy success. PSG as well. In France, the same thing. Owners will come in, huge amounts of money, buy players off the shelf, and yet it's success, but manufactured success. German clubs, because they date back to sporting institutions from the last 2 centuries ago, fans have a real ownership about their clubs, their sense of ownership. And I think they'd be very loath to lose that 50+1 rule. If, though, it meant that more teams could challenge Bayern on a more consistent basis, then maybe there's an argument for it. But I just think to risk losing what makes the German game so special and makes the club game over there, the kind of club fan scene, the fan culture so unique, would be a shame to lose that. I think, for all the pros of maybe losing that, I think the kind of cons would outweigh that, and we should look to keep the 50+1.
Yeah, because interesting, it's one of the arguments, let's say, against Bundesliga is that people say, well, Bayern Munich seems to be winning it all the time. And I remember in 2009, after 8 rounds, Bayern Munich were 8 point behind the leaders. And at the time, it was Bayer Leverkusen and Hamburg leading the table. And we were talking in our program on the channel I was working for with our Bundesliga commentator and asked him, so who's going to win the league? Is it Bayern Munich? And they did win the league, and they played the Champions League final in 2010. So that's one of the things that people sometimes mention when they talk about Bundesliga, that those who don't like spoilers shouldn't actually watch it.
Yeah, I mean, Bayern are strong. They've won it now 7 years on the spin. But last year was really close. Dortmund, I think, were only beaten on the final day to the title. And this year, we say it's a 5-way title race. So, Bayern, they have the financial clout. They are the biggest team in the league by, a fair margin. They have the power to spend. They have the power to keep players too, which Dortmund can't. The Leipzig model is to find players and then sell them on, and Bayern do things their way. But I think this year's been very close and very competitive, and it's not been all Bayern's way. And even now, I think 9 games left, we can't call who's going to be the champions. Yes, Bayern are the favourites. They've got that 4-point lead, but I think it could be close again this season.
Just in relation to Union Berlin, the Swiss manager, Urs Fischer, apparently left the camp and won't be there this weekend. Do we know exactly the reason behind it, or...?
We don't. We're told it's not to do with illness or the coronavirus, but he has left the club, left the squad on Wednesday, left the kind of quarantined camp they've been in. Urs Fischer at Union is a cult figure. This is the guy who took them to the Bundesliga for the first time in their history this season, and they've been a revelation. They've been superb. The team everyone tipped to be relegation fodder. They're in safe and secure mid-table. They beat Dortmund at home back in August. They've had a wonderful year with a team, in essence, of second division players. And Urs Fischer is a big reason why he's got them playing as a unit, as a team. So I'm sure there's nothing sinister in this. It's personal reasons. That's all the club have said. But I'm sure we'll be back before too long. But Urs Fischer at Union Berlin, that's a real kind of marriage made in heaven, those two. And I don't think they're going to break up anytime soon.
Looking at Hoffenheim, they're currently 8th on the table, 9th on the table. And Alfred Schreuder, who was the assistant at Ajax last season and took over the job of Julian Nagelsmann, who left to RB Leipzig. That's a strange decision to appoint, Schreuder, first of all. But having said that, I know he was an assistant at Hoffenheim previously between 2015 and 17. But the question is, how is he doing? Has he made, progress with the squad? Because Hoffenheim qualified for the Champions League last season. I know they didn't do well, but, you had to fill some big shoes with Nagelsmann leaving to Leipzig.
And not just Nagelsmann, they lost a few players as well from that squad, which reached the Champions League for 2 years in succession. So it was a case really of trying to almost build a new team at Hoffenheim. It's not worked. They did spend in January, brought in Munas Dabur from Sevilla. He's now injured, got a bad injury, I think, just before we took this break for the season. So they've had bad luck with injuries, but it's not been the same. I think Nagelsmann and that team overachieved for a couple of years. They were up there on merit for sure, but always punching above their weight. And I think Schreuder has come in, found they're going very tough. Julian Nagelsmann, we know, is a very hard act to follow. I think Schreuder's found that because they've been way, way short this season, Hoffenheim.
Do you think he's the right candidate for the job?
I think they looked at his links. Obviously, he'd been there with Nagelsmann as an assistant coach, then at Ajax as well. So he's been schooled at clubs who've played a certain way. They thought he'd come back as a head coach, knew the club pretty well, and could come and almost pick up the pieces from Nagelsmann. It's not worked out. they're mid-table, that they're not going to go down. I think European football is going to be beyond them this season. But I think judge them when they have a fully fit team again next year, because, as I say, they brought in Munas Dabur to really be the man to get that attack going again. He's now injured, so they've been found wanting. But don't forget, they went to Bayern and won this season too. So on their day, they've been very, very good. But they've been inconsistent, which I think is often the case for a new coach.
You mentioned the fantastic relationship in Berlin, in Union, a true union between the manager and the club and the team. But what went wrong for Jürgen Klinsmann in another Berlin club? It didn't last long.
He didn't last long, did he, Jürgen Klinsmann? It was always a strange appointment. He'd not had a club head coach's job since a disastrous spell at Bayern, I think 2007, 2008 or 08, 09, when things went really badly wrong for him at Bayern. Then obviously got the job as coach of the US national team. Had a home in California, seemed very happy in that job. Didn't really work out there either in terms of the of the football. And he was a strange choice. Hertha's been a funny club this season. They have a wealthy backer now. There's money there to bring players in. They made a choice in the summer. They had a very pragmatic style with Pal Dardai, the coach last season. It wasn't great to watch. It was solid. They were always going to challenge for maybe the last of the Europa League places. But the new backers wanted more. They wanted creative, exciting football, big-name players. So they gave Ante Čović the job. He didn't really fulfill that brief as coach. He went. Klinsmann came in into already a pretty messy situation. And, Klinsmann out of the game for so long as a coach, just never got going. So now he's gone. They've now brought in Bruno Labbadia, obviously a much more experienced coach in the Bundesliga. Very safe pair of hands. Not really a coach who's going to do anything revolutionary, but a safe pair of hands. But I think watch Hertha in the summer. I think they will spend big and surprise players with who they go for in the transfer market. But it's been a very messy season. I think Klinsmann was certainly part of that mess in Berlin this campaign.
Yeah, that situation we were asking you about earlier, by the way, while we've been talking, it appears to have happened with Werder Bremen, that one of the Werder players has been put under a 2-week quarantine. He's tested negative, but that's it. It's him affected and nothing else.
Yeah, I think the idea is that a player is taken out and then quarantined, but the other players can continue, obviously being monitored repeatedly, but can continue with the team not having to not play their game because of one positive test.
In terms of all the various leagues you've worked on, this is a dream job, is it?
This is my 5th season. I love it. I'm lucky that we have, I think, the best team of guys around me. We have a great commentary team, great co-commentators. All of us live and breathe the Bundesliga. So although, I work on other things, the Bundesliga consumes me every weekend. I did Premier League for Match of the Day for 11 years. Love that. But this, I think now the Bundesliga it's next level. I'm lucky that I get to do some of the pretty big games too, the Revier derbies, the Classicas as well. So I'm very lucky. And it's a league that I love. It's a league that I know inside out now. Players, clubs, chapter and verse. It's all... every week you enjoy. It doesn't matter if I'm doing Freiburg, Augsburg or Bayern Dortmund. I love the game just the same, because the German football, when the stadiums are populated, when they're full, it's brilliant. And I think the colour, the noise, the goals, the excitement the Bundesliga has, it's up there with the best leagues around. And okay, you can say Bayern have won it 7 years on the spin, but there's some great stories in there as well. And this has been a great season so far.
Stephane mentioned Hoffenheim. He was asking about the manager, but I'm just wondering, why is there so much hatred towards the owner of the Hoffenheim? Because he is investing into his home village, not even hometown, home village club.
Yeah,
it's a bit like Jack Walker dates in England with Blackburn Rovers all those years ago. So why do they hate him so much?
It goes back to the 50+1 thing, where German fans like their clubs grown organically. They don't like artificial input in terms of money. And certainly Dietmar Hopp played for the team, I think for their youth team in his childhood or early teens. So he had a bond and a link with his village team. And when he became a software multi-millionaire, he thought, right, I'm going to invest in TSG Hoffenheim. So he did. Took them from the local leagues into the professional game, into the Bundesliga in 2008, and they've been a fixture ever since. A lot of fans of other clubs don't like the way that club has been built on the software millions of Hop, and that has continued now for 12 years. We saw, obviously, before we had this break because of coronavirus, fan protests in stadiums, the game against Bayern, obviously, the 6-0 home defeat was interrupted for a long period by protests. And yeah, I mean, scenes which Bayern, I think Uli Hoeneß condemned the scenes from what he saw. And yeah, I think Hop is not popular. Whether that's right or not, who knows? But the guy loves his club, and it is his club, the club he played for. So it's not like a corporation buying a club from scratch and starting again. This is a club he played for, and it's his village team. So I don't quite understand the level of vitriol towards him, but you have to bear in mind the way German fans see their clubs and like to see their clubs run and grown, and Hoffenheim wasn't done in the traditional sense.
Is it fair to say that he was not well accepted as well by the corporate, some of the corporate clubs like Bayern Munich, well established, in Germany, obviously Bayern and other clubs like them, and it's kind of an establishment and also very conservative. Bayern is a very conservative club. If you see like the members, in place, Rummenigge and Beckenbauer and so on and so on. And do you think that was an issue as well for the owner of Hoffenheim?
Possibly, yeah. It is hard to become a member of that exclusive club. But, Hoffenheim, as I say, they've been there now for 12 years in the Bundesliga. And these protests, these gripes against Hop continue to be a factor. And you can't see that stopping anytime soon. You kind of hope, maybe this is me being a bit wishful thinking, but this whole coronavirus thing, hopefully it'll make us all think about being a bit kinder, a bit nicer, a bit more understanding towards people and everything, because we've kind of seen that it's a bigger world than just football. And hopefully this might kind of filter down and people be kind of, towards each other a bit kinder, a bit nicer, but who knows? But certainly Hop and Hoffenheim, it's not a story that's going to go away anytime soon, I don't think.
And do you think there's a feeling that the top players in Germany try to exclude him really from the circle?
I think Hoffenheim have kind of got in now to become almost an established club. Whether or not he was accepted from the outset as part of that club, I don't know. But I think in playing terms, certainly with Nagelsmann there for a couple of seasons, they did become among the German games elite, playing in the Champions League as well. Group stage one season, the qualifying rounds the previous. They did become a player in that club, but it's a hard club to get into. And whether Hop and Hoffenheim fit it or will fit, I don't know. But personally, having watched them play, I think they play good football. I think they, they do add to the Bundesliga, but you can kind of see why there is still that undercurrent from some clubs and some fans against them.
Do you miss Hamburg in the first Bundesliga, or maybe that season or more than one season in the second Bundesliga will serve them well?
I think with Hamburg, we all saw this coming. It was like Sunderland in England, where year on year, they would spend big and struggle, and eventually it was going to happen with relegation. It did. Their first ever relegation from the Bundesliga a couple of years ago, and it's been tough to get back. Bundesliga 2 is very hard to escape from. Big clubs find it tough to get back at the first attempt, and last year they fell short. We do miss them. They are a big club. They are a famous club. But I think sometimes big clubs have to go down to almost cleanse themselves and start again. And hopefully, if they do come back, they'll come back stronger and able to compete more, because a club of that size really should be, pushing for European football. But for year on year before relegation, it was almost a kind of relegation waiting to happen.
And how do you view the progress from RB Leipzig? Obviously, Julian Nagelsmann is in charge of the club, and it's a big corporation, and they follow more or less the same model that City, acquiring different clubs across the globe. And do you see progress internally, like so far, and from Nagelsmann's arrivals?
Yeah, Nagelsmann has got them playing wonderfully. They were playing well last season, but I think he's taken them on to the next level. I think their model's interesting. I think you look at, they're a corporate club. We know that. They are Red Bull's club. But the way they do things is they don't tend to buy players off the peg as the finished article. They will look in places like the Austrian Bundesliga, the Swiss League, the French Second Division, and find these players who've maybe kind of been missed by bigger clubs, and then develop them further, and then maybe sell them on for a big profit. That's their way of doing things. Obviously, they've got their link with them, Salzburg in Austria too, who they will trade players with. But I just think they're an interesting club. Their facilities, they've built an amazing academy, and it's all geared up to be a club that does compete long term. They're in this for the long haul, Red Bull, with Leipzig. And again, like Hoffenheim, it's upset the kind of football purist in Germany. But you look at them, and the way they play has actually won some friends. I think had they come up and been negative and not great to watch, the kind of vitriol would have been certainly more visible. But because they play really good football, it's actually quite hard to dislike Leipzig. You look at Timo Werner, brilliant. Yusuf Poulsen's been there since their third division days. They brought in players this year like Danny Olmo, like Patrick Schick. Good young players who look excellent. They're defenders. I mean, whoever scouts them, I don't know, but he's done a great job. Dayot Upamecano, probably the best young centre-half in Europe at the moment. Ibrahima Konate, I think, came in from Sochaux in France in the second division, and it's been a real revelation. Brilliant. You know, their recruitment is first-rate, and the way they play is a joy. They've got probably the best young coach in the game as well in Julian Nagelsmann, and they're set fair now to compete in the top three for many years to come, because it's all been put in place, I think well, and they've gone about things in a way which has worked for them.
I know the season is not over, but initially at the beginning of the campaign, we thought Leipzig could have been a contender to Bayern and Dortmund, but it seems they're 5 points behind Bayern. So what went wrong basically?
I think it's not so much what went wrong. I think you look at Bayern after Christmas, just hit their kind of superhuman gear where they blew teams away. And Leipzig do still drop points in silly games. Dortmund are the same. Dortmund, you look at last season, Dortmund, they were beaten, I think, at Fortuna Düsseldorf. They dropped points at Augsburg. It's silly games like that where Bayern's rivals tend to slip up and Bayern simply don't. Bayern are this consistent machine where they will win games that other teams will stumble in. And Leipzig, I think this season have been the same. They've been great. It's just one or two games where they've just taken their eye off the ball maybe and allowed cheap goals and mistakes to cost them dearly. But as I say, they are going to be, I think, going forward, an established top three team for many years to come in the Bundesliga.
You touched base on consistency, which is, I think, the key word for Leipzig. But why do you think they can improve, basically?
I think they'll improve because of Julian Nagelsmann. I think this year is his first year to kind of get his ideas across to them, to get them playing the way he wants. Under Ralf Rangnick, they were good, but Nagelsmann has taken them to a whole new level. He's got players like Timo Werner, again, to a whole new level. You can see why he's wanted by half the clubs in the Premier League. Exceptional striker, and Nagelsmann's style has really unlocked him. He can use his pace when he breaks away for them. And I think Nagelsmann has taken a good team and made them even better.
When you talk about this model for RB Leipzig, is it fair to say that there is one person behind it, Ralf Rangnick, when he became a sporting director almost 8 years ago? I think it was a long time ago. So was he the person behind it? Was that his sole responsibility to build the club in that way? Or was it Dieter Mateschitz who said, okay, we're going to bring the young players and then we'll sell them on. We're not spending that much, even in the first Bundesliga?
I think it's a Rangnick thing. I think obviously, he's one of the great thinkers in the German game, has been there for over 20 years. And I think what he's done from his days with Ulm upwards, he's been a great thinker. And he will have seen Leipzig as a great project to go to really mould an entire football ethos, not just Leipzig, but also their clubs in the US, in Austria, and in Brazil. So he's overseeing the whole Red Bull football empire. And Leipzig certainly, I think, are the kind of pinnacle of that. And the ethos they have to find these young players, Naby Keita at Liverpool was one. I'm sure we'll see Konate and Meccano move on to bigger clubs going forward. There'll be a kind of Leipzig fingerprint on a whole host of clubs where players have been brought through that system to go and play elsewhere. But it's exciting. They're great to watch. I was there a couple of years ago when they beat Bayern for the first time. You kind of felt that was a real special day because that was the first time they'd beaten Bayern. And I think for any club in the German game, that is when you kind of know you've arrived, when you can kind of go toe-to-toe and beat, on a one-off basis, but beat Bayern Munich. And I got the impression that day was maybe a day the club came of age a bit.
Now, when we invite commentators on, we always like a few commentary heroes to be nominated. I'm sure you've got a couple, Dan.
I have. Well, I mean, for me, there was only one really, Barry Davies, who in my childhood was, for me, the voice of football. Okay, John Motts and Brian Moore's contemporaries, but for me, I was always in the Barry Davies camp. I think he didn't over-talk, but the words he would choose were the right words at the right time. So a very judicious wordsmith who, as a TV commentator, I think he nailed it, in that Barry Davies only spoke when he had to. But when he did, it was always worth listening to. Iconic voice, and not just football too. Olympic Games, he'd commentate on a whole host of sports. That versatility, I think, is something as well that these days isn't always appreciated. But yeah, for me, Barry Davies was the absolute maestro.
I mean, still commentating on a couple of things even now, but do you feel he finished football, or football finished with him just a little too early?
Maybe. I think Barry Davies, you think back, he'll always be thought of as being the BBC's number 2, because he did one World Cup final, and it was always John Motson who would get the bulk of the bigger games. I think that's harsh because, there wasn't much between them. Let's be honest, they were both excellent commentators. But for me, Davies was my preferred style. Will he be? I think guys in the business talk about Barry Davies with a huge reverence, a warmness, and a love that, this was a guy who we all know the guys who are at the top of their game. And Davies was for decades at the top of his game, and maybe was a bit hard done by, not to get more of the real showpiece matches, but as a voice, as a broadcaster, peerless for me. And Barry Davies for me was the absolute pinnacle of what a commentator really was and really could be.
And in terms of radio?
Radio, I grew up kind of in the days of Radio 2, the kind of precursor to Radio 5 in the UK. And Peter Jones, again, that silky delivery, that wonderful voice. He died in 1990, so it's a long time ago now. But I remember, as a young boy, with my parents' transistor radio, tuning into midweek cup ties on Radio 2, that voice over the medium wave crackle, fantastic. And you think, there weren't that many commentators back in the day. You think, radio and TV, there weren't many channels, there weren't many voices doing it. And maybe that's why they did stand out. But I think Peter Jones, for me, was just the consummate radio voice, that cool authority, that calmness. I mean, his words at Hillsborough were chosen incredibly tactfully, thoughtfully, in a very measured way. God forbid none of us ever have to handle a situation like that. But the way Peter Jones did was just, it did an awful situation justice. It did it respect, and it was done in a way which I would hope I could come even a tenth of the way to replicating, should that ever be the kind of sad and fortune to befall me to be in that kind of situation.
Well, Dan, thank you very much for joining us from your lovely garden. Something I've been trying to emulate myself, but the Wi-Fi doesn't work out there.
Real pleasure, mate.
And so say all of us. And there's been a big situation brewing in Marseille, Stephane.
Yes, Marseille, it's a very chaotic situation at the minute. Anthony Zubizarreta resigned. Obviously, he left as a common agreement. He was at the club since 2016, came over from Barcelona. There was a huge hope that he would have brought some big names or some young promising players from Spain. And we believe he had a a great network, but unfortunately decided to part ways with Marseille. It was an agreement between him and Jacques-Henri Hérault, the president of Marseille. It was a common agreement, and it was confirmed last night. And we believe more, there will be more people leaving the club. It seems, there's crisis looming in at Marseille. Discussion about maybe, the club to be sold from, to some a prince from Saudi Arabia. And the question mark is André Villas-Boas will be still the manager at Marseille for the next 24 hours. That's a big question, and that's going to be a huge loss if they lose those two people, especially if Marseille qualifying for Champions League next season.
Is there any way that it is salvageable, do you think?
That's going to be very challenging. I mean, Marseille, it's a very, particular club. Its fans are quite, at times, eccentric, and they can be at times very violent as well. They're not afraid to express, their opinions and physically to the players and sometimes to the staff. And look, I think Frank Marcourt will definitely sell the club. Well, I can't say definitely sell the club, but when you have your top players like Mandanda, Thauvin, who still have only 12 months left on the contract and not been told what's going to happen for the next few months and not extended the contract, probably leaving the club next season on a free transfer. The question has to be asked here, what do they want to do with the club? And losing your sporting director and probably André Villas-Boas will give himself 24 to 48 hours to make a decision. Scatter the club left yesterday with Andoni Zubizarreta. There's a lot of things will change probably over the next 12 months. So yeah, it's a serious issue for the club, and we all know that Marseille has some serious financial problem as well with the financial fair play.
And the Austrian Bundesliga is due to come back in the next few weeks, but a bit of a problem for the leaders, Lask of Linz, Mark.
Yeah, Lask have never won the league title, the Bundesliga title, since it was formed in the 70s. Obviously desperate to win it this year. They're 3 points ahead of Salzburg, who've won the last 6. But a little too keen because they were caught out doing some collective training sessions before they were allowed to, a couple of days before they were supposed to. Some images came out. 11 out of the 12 clubs have protested and complained that Lask were effectively cheating and putting everything at risk. Today, there was a press conference in which the Lask Vice President Jürgen Werner said it was a really stupid thing to do. They all admitted we did 4 sessions that we shouldn't have. We were trying to gain some momentum. We let emotion guide us. The vice president actually offered his resignation to the club president, who apparently didn't know until the news broke, until these images started coming out. To make things more complicated, Lask said someone broke in, filmed training, put some equipment there. So all sorts of shenanigans going on. The health minister has said this was a very serious foul. With the league set to resume on June 2nd, you'd have to wonder, will they be in line for maybe a points deduction? Because a fine is surely not enough in that case. Before all that, May 29th is the cup final to get them going. Salzburg against second division Austria Lutenau.
And how much are you looking forward to the Bundesliga in Germany coming back this weekend?
Yeah, I think everyone's looking forward to it. We've all been starved of football, and also we just want to see, I guess, can it be done and will it work? And if it works in the Bundesliga, if everything passes off without incident, then surely everyone else has a plan, has a roadmap for continuing their seasons as well. And maybe the likes of the French league and some of those French clubs, for example, who called things a little too early, might be saying, well, maybe we should have held off and continued going or holding on until the situation improved. But it should be an exciting title race as well, with 3 teams in the running, Bayern, Dortmund and Leipzig. So lots to play for still.
So our classic game this week was shown in highlights form on BBC television last weekend. The Soviet Union against Belgium, the second round of the World Cup, and one of those games that pops up every so often in terms of classic collections. Belgium, who would reach the final of Euro 1980, Soviet Union, who would go on to the final of Euro 88 to be beaten by the Dutch, but they came head-to-head in Leon, 15th of June 1986. Igor Belanov putting the Soviet Union ahead with a belter outside the area just before the half-hour mark. Enzo Schifo equalising 11 minutes into the second period, and Belanov to make it 2-1 with 20 minutes to go. That's the point where my mother turned the TV off. So, I mean, the Soviet Union got it over the line then, 2-1 victory. Absolutely magnificent, and just things continued from there. That is how it finished, isn't it?
Yeah, 4-3.
Yeah. So while I was in bed and probably not asleep, Jans Keulemans had equalised dramatically with 13 minutes to go, the old Belgian veteran. So that sent the game into extra time. Stephane Jauny had put Belgium in front just towards the end of the first period of extra time. Nico Clausen, who off the back of that performance and Belgium's run to the semi-finals, he ended up at Tottenham Hotspur, making it 4-2. Within a minute, the Soviet Union getting a goal back through Belanov to complete his hat-trick. That from the penalty spot. And Dmytro, a great Soviet team, 12 of that squad from Dynamo Kiev. Was it seen at the time in Ukraine when you were growing up as a Ukrainian squad?
Well, it's difficult to say how people were thinking about it back then, because we're still talking about 80s, about Soviet Union. But of course, it was a matter of pride. You know, a lot of Ukrainian players playing for then national team just a month later after lifting the Bundesliga in Lyon at Stade Dzhulai. I think we've mentioned it previously that the national team was struggling in the friendlies, preparing for the World Cup. So that win against Atletico Madrid was a good enough reason for the federation to sack the manager and appoint Valery Lobanovsky again, even though he was sacked from the national team back in '83 when Soviet Union didn't qualify for the European Championship. And as everything was run by the Communist Party, of course, the communist bosses advised not to employ him ever as a national team manager. And then just, 2.5 years later, he was back and he returned with that 6-0 win over Hungary in the first game of the World Cup for the team. And then they drew with France, they beat Canada and faced Belgium. It's interesting to note that a lot of people were convinced that actually refereeing decisions went against the team, that Belgium scored 2 goals from offsides. And when you watch it, first of all, I want to ask you, when you watched it, did you notice anything about it? Did you really think, oh, that was a bloody offside there?
When I was watching at the time, no, absolutely. And again,
you were very asleep at the time.
Well, that's correct, yes. When I was watching it properly for the first time 4 years ago, no. And the same last week.
What I thought was maybe the equaliser from Keulemans, you could argue. But what I noticed most of all, all 4 goals, and a friend had asked while we were watching the highlights, how did this Soviet team not do more? All 4 goals, absolutely static defence, dozy defenders.
Exactly, because, you're saying maybe, because I remember back in 1970, the Soviet Union played Uruguay in the quarterfinal of the World Cup, and Uruguay scored a goal after 116 minutes, I think, something like that. And again, when I was growing up, everyone in the Soviet Union was telling the story how the ball went over the line, and by the sound of it, it probably crossed Mexican-American border when it went over the line. But when I found video many years later and I watched it, I was like, well, I can't say if it's over or not. So there was no reason for them to stand there and raise their hands and show to the referee that now the ball was out of bounds. And I think same things were happening there because, of course, 4 years later, the same Swedish referee was refereeing Soviet Union, Argentina, and Maradona used his hand of God again to save Argentina from an obvious goal. So people were saying, oh, yeah, it's the same referee who did the Belgium game. But conceding 4 goals in the playoff game of the World Cup, it's not good enough. So that's it. That's the problem.
Looking back to the Soviet team, what struck me was a fast-paced game, and they were very good on the break and very quick Zavarov and Belanov at the front. They were very, interesting players, and they were excellent and great to watch. And that game was, a great game of football. Obviously, 4-3 after extra times, and but the first game of the Soviet Union, 6-0 against Hungary, with 6 different goal scorers. I thought it was absolutely amazing, and they were winning like 3-0 after 30 minutes. I thought they were very, very impressive, and they finished, top of the group ahead of France during the World Cup, and then France went to beat Belgium for the third play match 4-2. They were not physically big players, but so quick and technically very gifted. And if you look at the Belgium side, some tremendous players like Enzo Schifo and Frankie Verkotteren, Anderlecht manager, and some big players. Enzo Schifo was such a maestro in the middle of the park, and very technical players with Frankie Verkotteren, and that's what reminds me of that game. Just some key players in both teams, but core players come from Dynamo Kiev at the time, one of the major forces in Europe.
How late was it in the day before the tournament? It was decided it would be that it would be the Dynamo Kiev squad, the Dynamo Kiev boss.
I remember it was a game against Finland early in May, probably a few days after the Winners' Cup final, which was on the 2nd of May. And they drew the game in Moscow against Finland. So it happened very quickly. It was probably a couple of weeks before the tournament kicked off, or maybe a bit more, but no more than that.
And we didn't get to see that Cup Winners' Cup final, if I remember. Was that the one that was played on a Friday night? We'd seen Everton the season before winning the Cup Winners' Cup, and we'd seen Ajax win it the season after with Van Basten, but we hadn't that game live in 1986. I remember they were trying to run off the European finals very, very quickly just before the World Cup kicked off, because it was a very early...
Oh, I'm sorry, Will. Yeah, I'm just checking it now. It was Friday, because I never thought about it as a Friday night game. Yes, honestly, it was a Friday night game, yeah. That's interesting.
Because that tournament kicked off very early, the World Cup. It was a 31st of May kickoff. It was finished on the 29th of June, 24 teams, 52 matches. And they just absolutely rocketed through it in a way that you don't get really with tournaments these days.
One of the interesting things about that game as well, or one of the more surprising things, seeing the Soviet Union implode like they did, was the fact that Belgium weren't in great form. They qualified for the second round as one of the third place teams behind Mexico. Second was Paraguay. They drew with them. They beat Iraq by only 2-1. So watching it back and seeing Belanov get that wonderful hat-trick, I think he finished with 4 goals and 6 assists in the tournament. European Footballer of the Year for 1986 as well in the end. It was a real surprise to see the Soviet Union lose that game. And I know Dmytro's talking about maybe the conspiracy, the idea that there was some sort of conspiracy about it, but is there not some sort of feeling that maybe this was a massive missed opportunity for that side?
It was indeed. Yeah, obviously. Because it's interesting, before that game, people were talking about the next opponent, a possible next opponent, and they were talking about Denmark, because it was Denmark v Spain. If you remember, Spain won the game 5-1. So it was amazing that Denmark and Soviet Union were in the same qualifying group, just as with Ireland. You must remember that. And they had a fantastic game in Copenhagen. I think Mikael Laudrup said that it was the best game he ever played in his career, because both teams were playing really well, and Denmark won it 4-2. It was a great game of football as well. So they were hoping for a new mates with Denmark. It's not that they thought, Belgium is just not an opponent, but seeing what they have done against France, they did play really well against France and they beat Hungary 6-0. People did hope that it would be a quarterfinal between Soviet Union and Denmark. But as it happens in football, well, it was something different.
And it wasn't thought of at the time. It's just what a group Ireland were in that qualifying group, finishing behind the Soviet Union and Denmark, losing their last 2 games to those two. And they ended up being 2 of the best teams in Europe of the 80s, full stop. And Ireland and poor old Owen just couldn't compete with that. Just having a look through that Soviet squad as well, only 5 players with clubs from modern-day Russia, which is quite extraordinary, because it wasn't just Dynamo Kiev supplying players, but also Dnipro as well from Ukraine. And Dynamo Minsk with Sergei Olenikov, who had a decent enough tournament, getting on the score sheet too.
Yeah, Dnipro was a very good side at the moment. They won the Soviet title in 83, and they would win it again in 88. And if Stephane remembers, they played against Bordeaux in the quarterfinals, I think, in the European Cup, and they was decided on penalties. Just one missed penalty, and they were out. So it was a very good side at the time, competing in Europe regularly. They had some good players. But the thing is, since it happened just a couple of weeks before the World Cup, it was very easy for Lewandowski to say, so I'm taking this team. I'm just adding a few players from other sides, of course, but I'm taking this team because this team is ready. And it had a fantastic season. They won the Bundesliga Cup that year. Later, they won Soviet title, and it was the second in a row. And also, when the qualification campaign started for Euro 88, they had a fantastic win over France, reigning European champions, in Paris at Parc des Princes. It was a 2-0 win. Absolutely brilliant football from Soviet Union. Zavara was outstanding. Probably one of those games that attracted Juventus to him.
And what struck me as well, if I look at some of the players from that Soviet Union team, Dasayev, probably one of the best keeper in the 80s in worldwide football, and Zavarov. Those guys, left in 1988. Most of the clubs like Dynamo Kiev, and to move Zavarov, well-known player, he went to Juve and then went to Nancy, which was very unusual to sign a Soviet Union player at the time. Even more interesting, he went to play for Saint-Dizier, who was a second-tier and third-tier club in France. He even coached Saint-Dizier for a few years between 1995 and 2003. Dasayev also left Spartak Moscow in 1988 to Sevilla. What's the reason behind it? Because Belanov did exactly the same thing.
Well, you have to understand that Soviet players, of course, weren't allowed to go abroad. So in the 80s, when rules were changing, there were first signs of that. Those players could go abroad. There was still a lot of work to do, and it was quite complicated to negotiate with Soviet authorities, but at least they were ready to let players go. And even a few years ago, a few years before 1988, let's say, it probably wouldn't have happened. But by that time, yes, they were ready to talk. They were ready to listen to the offers. And for the players, you can imagine what kind of opportunity it was, because you were stuck in the same environment all your professional life. And then you go abroad, you're making actual money because, of course, they were paid something. It was a good amount, let's say, in Soviet Union. But when they went to Italy, Germany, and different countries, it was something absolutely new for them. And I think it was Vadim Boshkov who managed in Italy at the time, who said, the problem with Soviet players is when they get their first million, they think it's enough. And they don't want to do anything else to get more millions, unlike their Western European colleagues.
And do you think it was a political decision to let them go?
So-called perestroika, when Mikhail Gorbachev was trying to make Soviet Union a more democratic country. Well, it was obvious that the country would fall apart. Not when he started that, because it all started much earlier and it was bound to happen. But he wanted it to be more open, and that was part of it. When you let footballers go, and when they end up in a club like Juve, of course, man, it's a sign of the new times for them.
Just in relation to that 1986 World Cup for the USSR, who were the leaders in the team? Because I know the captain was Anatoly Dmytro, but Dasayev, do you think Dasayev, Zavarov, Belanov were the real leaders into the squad?
Well, I'd say Dasayev was quite a charismatic figure in the team, but also you have to understand that in that particular side, especially after winning Cup Winners' Cup in '86, there were a lot of players with a character. And you still had Blachin. He didn't play much in that particular World Cup, but he was in the squad. And you had other players who could be leaders in any particular moment. But maybe, even though Belanov got a hat-trick against Belgium, maybe what they needed against Belgium, someone at the back to be a leader. Because again, we're going back to what Mark mentioned. When they were considering those goals, there was a lot of improvement to be made, let's say, in every single situation. maybe they didn't have what Argentina had in '86, of course, when they had Maradona and they won their title. But then Germany made it to the final without any outstanding player in their ranks as well. So it's quite difficult to think about it and say, okay, yeah, they probably lacked this particular player, or this particular player lacked leadership characteristics.
I mean, it's fair to say Belgium were tremendously strong at the time because they'd reached the second phase, the old group stage, the 12-team group stage of the last World Cup, but didn't make it into the semi-finals out of that. Euro 1980 finalists, but worth remembering, they needed a playoff against the Netherlands in order to get into that World Cup. And the Dutch, who 2 years later we would see just how good they were, missed out. And they were two sides who probably, and the strength of they were in 86, well, not easily, but could have made the semi-finals.
Yes, sometimes we just forget how difficult the whole qualification process was. But now when half of the UEFA members can actually qualify for the European Championship, well, it's a bit easy, but European Championship was just of 8 teams. And, well, it was a bit more for the World Cup. More teams from Europe were playing in the World Cup, but you still had to go through that qualification group, and it wasn't that easy. In those days, sometimes you actually, when you start thinking about that and you look at the games, you look at the tables, and you're like, bloody hell, that team was actually below that particular side, and that side was so good. Or that team finished above this team that was also very, very good. Because, for example, Romania, who played in European Championship in '84, didn't qualify for Mexico '86 because Northern Ireland were actually better than them, and they went through with England.
Yeah, Romania had to wait another 4 years to qualify for a major tournament, which was Italia 90. We'll be talking about them shortly. But that Belgian side was just tremendous. There was just a real classic look about them. Faf was, a reasonably reliable goalkeeper. There was Eric Gerrits, who was the only overseas-based member of the squad at the time, strangely enough, with PSV Eindhoven. The then Belgian football club-wise was exceptionally strong. You had George Grun in the centre of defence. You had Stefan de Mol. You had Frankie Verkouteren, who's won a couple of titles since then as a boss in Belgium. The captain, Jan Keulemans, who was part of that terrific 1980 side. Nico Clausen, who was still quite young. He was in his early 20s at the time. But then they were able to take Leo van der Elst off the bench. They went on to beat Spain in penalties in that quarterfinals, which was played immediately after Argentina against England on that same day in '86. And obviously, they ended up coming up against Maradona in the semi-finals when it was very much Maradona's year.
Yeah, interesting about that Belgian team, and you talked about not many of them playing abroad. Jan Keulemans has talked in the past about getting a huge offer from AC Milan after helping Belgium to the 1980 European Championship final, and he was told afterwards that he was the only person ever around that time to refuse Milan. Whether that's true or not, it's a good story. But he was the captain of that team, scored in the quarter-final as well against Spain. A good header, scored in that game against the Soviets too. As good as they were, it was still incredible back then for Belgium, I think, to get to the semi-finals and get that close. Because as Keulemans said, talking about the Soviet Union, he said they were probably the best team in the tournament. They were certainly playing the best football at the time. That scored 9, conceded 1 in the groups, and then, as I say, it was just very strange that they didn't manage to squeak through. But you have to remember they had a chance as well right at the end, to kind of cross that went wrong, that Faf was able to react and tip over, and the final whistle immediately blew then. So there could have been another penalty shootout in that World Cup, which was pretty famous for them.
Yeah, I think, you have to remember as well, we talk about DMOKF, but the Belgian clubs in the 80s were pretty strong in Europe. They couldn't the Champions League. Anderlecht went to the semi-finals, I think, and lost against Steaua Bucharest in the UEFA Cup. Waregem was went to the semis, but those clubs in Belgium was providing a lot of good players, and those players were not traveling to foreign clubs, and it was a strong place for football. And I remember, from a French perspective, every time you play Belgium, that was going to be a struggle to beat them.
Yeah, I mean, Anderlecht won the UEFA Cup in '83. They reached the final again in '84 and lost to Tottenham on penalties. Mechelen even won the Cup Winners' Cup, having come out of nowhere to win the Cup the year before. Michel Prudhomme was in goal for them at the time, and then they went on to greater things as well. Was there a feeling with Euro 88 a couple of years away, Dmytro, that the Soviet Union had, a bit like we'd said with France of that same era, that they just sort of missed a chance?
Well, probably, yeah. As I mentioned, that win over France in Paris, that restored the belief. And when they qualified for Euro 88, there was some sort of expectation, I'd say, before the tournaments, and they managed to get out of the very difficult group of beating Netherlands and England. There was a 1-1 draw with Ireland. And then there was probably the pinnacle of Lobanovsky's work with the national side, the semi-final against Italy, which was won 2-0. And if you really want to know what kind of manager he was, you should watch that game. Because before that game, he asked every player whether he was ready to play like they played, to put Italy under pressure in their own half. And everyone said yes. So that meant the whole team was behind the idea. They were prepared physically and mentally as well. That game, for Italians as well, was remarkable because so many Italian managers, Fabio Capello, Marcello Lippi, later we're talking how Lobanovsky influenced them as well when they watched his teams play. And that particular game was also mentioned because it's interesting. In the same year, in 88, Soviet Union in Italy played a friendly in Bari in February, I think, and it was 4-1 to Italy. And it was very, very different in Germany in the summer.
One thing that wasn't different was, in many ways, the makeup of the squad. There were still 11 players from Dynamo Kiev there. Lobanovsky was still there. Probably one name that had jumped into the squad that hadn't been prominent for Mexico was Sergei Baltacha with Dynamo Kiev, who ended up with Ipswich Town, and then when he was playing in Scotland, his daughter Elena ended up becoming a British tennis player and sadly passed away at the height of her career. And Alexei Mikhailichenko was coming along at that stage. Was it a way that the World Cup was almost a kind of a dry run, and that the main team, a younger side, was ready to emerge for Euro 88?
No, you mentioned Mikhailichenko. He was just beginning to break through with Dynamo Kiev at the time, and 88 was probably his best season with the club. I think he was voted the best Soviet player of the year. If Soviet Union had beaten Netherlands in the final, he probably could have even had a chance to get the Ballon d'Or. But I'd say that, no, it's like if you look at the team, it was basically the same team. They went to many changes. And that continuity also helped them in the European Championship against opponents in the group stage, and then, of course, against Italy, who were themselves building the team for the World Cup they will be hosting 2 years later.
And Stephane, you've been doing some extra viewing yourself with a Soviet Union hint. 1974, Ireland 3, USSR 0, Don Givens hat-trick.
Surprisingly, I couldn't believe the number of people at the game at Daliman Park. And I'm still puzzled about how many people Daliman Park can hold on the game. At the game, it's I could see some supporters, on the roof of at Daliman Park to watch the game. Great performance for the Irish, and 3-0. Look, I was not very familiar with the that game, to be honest with you, Will, and it's something I just look at, on the night, and I say it was a great game of football, and Ireland dominating, quite easily and comfortably that team.
Yeah, that was Brady and Giles in midfield, and Giles, there was the beginning of the trend of the player manager, and he was captain as well. Steve Highway of Liverpool, Ray Tracy, who ended up being Shamrock Rovers' boss and ended up with a bit of a TV career as well. I mean, absolutely great days. And the thing about Daliman, the official attendance, 31,758. But it was quite similar again for that Ireland-France game that we were talking about recently in 1981, where Michael Robinson had dominated so much. And if I remember, one of Italy's first games after being crowned world champions in 82, again was away to Ireland at Dalymount, and possibly just a friendly, but again, absolutely crammed. The stadium doesn't look like that anymore, but it looked incredible when it was full. 100% safe? Maybe not.
No, but I have to say I was quite impressed by Liam Brady making that run in the central midfield and trying to finish with a strike all the time. And every time he had the ball, something was happening with Liam Brady. We don't recognise Liam Brady as the player he was, basically.
Stephane said there were some fans on the roof. I'd say there were thousands looking at those images. But that goes to show, it was a really big sport in Ireland, and one of the reasons was we had players like Johnny Giles and Liam Brady, and I keep saying this, we did play good football back in the day. A lot of people who've seen Ireland play in the last 20 years maybe don't agree, but that was a great example. Brady and Giles in midfield, Brady making his debut for Ireland, strikes me. Nowadays we talk about, Jack Grealish, we have to get him in, he has to play. Troy Parrott has to play. We've had these players over the last few years. One, as of yet, they're nothing like Liam Brady, because he truly was a world-class player and clearly was at that stage. And the other, I look back, Brady had played a clutch of games for Arsenal, I think at least a couple the season before. That game was played in October, and Brady had started a whole series of games for Arsenal before getting his debut for Ireland. So it always frustrates me when there's this clamour for any player who's done anything to get a game for Ireland. And I think that was shown back then. You kind of had to prove yourself and then you're ready for international football, which I don't think has been the case for some of the players we've been bigging up over the last few years as journalists and Irish supporters, I suppose.
And then, about Liam Brady, his look, was his long hair, he was quite charismatic on the pitch. I know it was his debut, he was just starting with Ireland. And but every time he touched the ball, something was happening. I have to be honest with you. Look, I was looking at for the first time the game, and struck me at first thing, Liam Brady in the middle of the park and driving. It was a driving force in the middle of the pitch, and how many fans could be squeezed at Daliman Park? That's quite impressive. I have to be honest with you.
Yeah, and actually, interesting, mentioning Liam Brady, ITV had the 1979 FA Cup final on last week, which was, the 5-minute final. Arsenal 2-0 up, then Manchester United pull it back to 2-2. 2-0 up with 5 minutes to go, then it's 2-2, and then Alan Sunderland gets the winner. And Kevin Corcoran, who I worked with in TV for a long time, producer, director, he just sent a good message off the back of that. Arsenal had 3 from Northern Ireland, 3 from the Republic of Ireland, 1 Scot, and 4 Englishmen playing that day. And United had 5 Scots, 2 from Northern Ireland, 1 Wales, and 3 English. And that was before, the likes of Paul McGrath came into the squad. Different times, definitely. And there were 2 excellent squads as well.
On a final note about that game against USSR, it took me a while to recognize Daliman Park, because I wasn't sure initially it was Daliman Park with so many people around the pitch.
Yeah, it's a pity what happened, because obviously a bit of that stand facing the cameras was knocked, and obviously the TV cameras then went over to the other side, but that's a car park now. I remember even when I was a kid, when you used to get occasional friendlies in Dalymount in the 80s, and it was packed and the atmosphere would be brilliant. And there are some photos that you would see even from League of Ireland games from the 60s and 70s when there would be touching on 30,000 there, and it looked absolutely incredible. And having done the last, I think, competitive game that was there, that was on TV, yeah, it definitely needs a bit of redevelopment, certainly.
Yeah, nothing has really changed, to be honest with you, at Daliman Park. But with a full crowd, it looks a proper pitch.
So I remember during the Setanta Cup, there was a Saturday lunchtime game. Bohemians were at home to somebody like Linfield or Glentoran, and they put them where the cameras are, which is normally now empty these days, that terrace. And it definitely helped the atmosphere. So facing the Jody stand, same side as the cameras. And the atmosphere was fantastic. There must have been about 400 or 500 fans who'd come down from Belfast for that. And it was an absolutely brilliant atmosphere. It was fabulous. And it's not the sort of thing that you get much of anymore.
And I played my first game in Ireland at Daliman Park against Bowes with Shelbourne. That was in 1997. We lost 2-1.
A fault for the goals?
You scored, did you?
No, we lost, unfortunately, and we knocked out as well.
Stephane's point about Brady, one of the reasons maybe he's not appreciated as much as he should be is the fact that he missed out on Euro 88 and World Cup 1990 as well. He'd be a much bigger name, I think. He is a big name in Europe, but more remembered in Ireland if he had played in those tournaments.
But that's very strange, Mark, because when you look at Brady, he's well known in France because he played for Juve and in Italy or Spain, whatever. I can ask my dad, he will know about Liam Brady. I'm not saying he will know about Roy Keane, but he will know about more Liam Brady than Roy Keane because Liam Brady played in Juve. Juve in the 80s was a big club in Europe.
Not on Irish TV.
That's it. I would say, unfortunately, the problem was the first season we got Serie A in Ireland was 89-90, and he'd already gone back to English football and to West Ham by that stage. I mean, his final few seasons with West Ham, he scored some absolutely terrific goals, but they got relegated during that time, unfortunately. Had a couple of good cup runs, but the peak of his career at club level we never got to see because we didn't have Serie A at the time. It would have been wonderful to see him. Because remember, he was Player of the Year one season there, which is remarkable when you think about it.
Yeah, and there's not many Irish players who went to play for Juve. It's something, it's quite remarkable for a young guy from Santry, I presume, isn't it?
Yeah, Whitehall.
Robbie Keane had his time at Inter as well, which we all got to see, but that was a different story.
Yeah, but Liam Brady was the main player at Juve. He was a guy who was, again, the driving force in the park. Robbie Keane was a young player going to Inter. It's a different ball game, and surely, like Brady, there was high expectation going to Juve to deliver. And, well, to me, the best player in Ireland so far was maybe Paul McGrath.
Right, that is it for now. We'll be coming back to you after the weekend with a look at the first Bundesliga season and whatever other action there's been in Europe, Faroe Islands, Belarus, bit of action in Korea as well this weekend. But until then, don't forget to like and rate. Do subscribe also, and we'll be back in a few days' time. Bye.